Hello, Sean family. We are going to be doing something a little bit different for Soul Food Bible Study this evening. Shine desires to be a church that is on the front lines of racial reconciliation. And I've had the privilege of over the last couple of years of having many conversations with pastors of all different races who desire to be part of the solution. Pastors who see ourselves as uh, being people in the church who have responsibility not only to the church but to the world, to show the world what reconciliation looks like, starting with the church. And so, what we're going to do tonight, in light of the Ahmaud Arbery situation that happened in Georgia a couple of months ago, and all of the kind of the tension that rose up during that time, I had a chance to have some conversations with some pastors over the last couple of weeks, and just decided with one of them that we were going to just kind of record what a conversation about race kind of looks like between us. Not that we have all of the solutions or all of the answers, but just kind of how we dialogue in a way that promotes healing, promotes awareness, and hopefully continues to take us down this road towards some real healing, reconciliation, where the church can actually show the world how this thing is done. So tune in for, I guess it's about 30 to 40 minutes. We're just going to kind of talk about some things that impact Black people, impact white people in particular, and prayerfully, we can be a church that is making a major difference in this area. Hey guys, Pastor Jerron here with my friend, Pastor Nigel Kelly, who pastors a church down in Pleasanton, right? Pleasanton, Texas. And we started talking about race issues, I want to say a few years back. I think we were at a conference, if I'm not mistaken, and there was something going on in the community at that time. And during a session that we were going through, I just brought up the topic of race and brought up an article that someone had written, and it kind of sparked a conversation amongst a group of pastors about race and where we are as the church, the Christian church, the evangelical church, and how we can start working towards racial reconciliation. And so I know a lot of people are having these discussions, but I think it's very important that we continue having these discussions and try to continue to move the ball down the road as far as making progress goes. So Pastor Nigel, thank you for being here with me and doing this. And just want to talk a little bit about the Ahmaud Arbery situation, and even more broadly than that, just racism in general, and kind of how the church works and all this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there was the issue with Starbucks a couple years ago. Some people were asked to leave. I can't remember all the details on it, but it was the Starbucks issue a couple years ago. And so, Jerron was good enough to give us a great message. And so we got talking after that. I wanted to find out a little bit more from his perspective. So we started discussing. And then when the Ahmaud Arbery thing came up recently, my heart just went out to Jerron, having talked before about the issues and things like that. My heart went out to Shine Bible and all of you guys. And so I approached Jerron and said, hey, would it be helpful for you guys if I came on and talked about that a little bit? And so first and foremost, I wanted to express deep sympathy for what your community is going through, what you guys personally are going through. And when one part of the church hurts, the other parts are affected as well. And so even though I don't feel exactly what you feel, I want you to hear from me and from our church, Community Bible Chapel, that we stand with you, and we are so sorry for the pain and the suffering that you are going through and have gone through. And we really care about that. And so wanted to express that, let you know that you're not alone, and yeah, just say we're deeply sorry for this whole issue and all that goes into it. And so I wanted to start out with that, saying that. And the other reason I wanted to come on is it seems to me that sometimes there's this conception that I think is sometimes given to the African American community that you're not seeing this correctly. There's not really systemic racism. There's not these things happening, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about that and say no, I disagree with that. I think there definitely is that, and so we want to have a conversation about that with you, Jaron, and have that conversation together. So I reached out to Jaron, and he said, yeah, that would be helpful. So Jaron, why did you think it would be helpful to have this conversation? What were you thinking for your folks?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about racism, Black people, and I can't speak for all Black people, I'm not trying to do that, but I will say from my experience and the people that I am closest to, talking about race and racism is an ongoing thing. Whether there's an Ahmaud Arbery situation going on, whether there's guys getting kicked out of Starbucks that you referenced earlier, Black people talk about race on a regular basis. It's just part of what we deal with on a regular basis, and so we're constantly talking about it. I think sometimes what I hear from white people is that let's stop talking about racism. And to talk about racism somehow makes it worse or makes us continue to dredge up hurtful, harmful memories and past events that have happened in America. And if we're going to move forward, we need to stop talking about it. And I think that is the wrong response. We must talk about it because not only did things happen in the past, but there's still stuff going on today. One of the ways that I kind of think about this is it would be like saying to a spouse who was unfaithful to their spouse, or two spouses where there's infidelity, and one saying, well, hey, I stopped the infidelity, so let's just move on. I've stopped, we're good, let's stop talking about it. And the other spouse who was cheated on is saying, well, wait, it hasn't gone away because we still have to process some stuff. We still have to talk about this. We have to process it. There are still impacts from what did happen that are still affecting me today. So I want to talk about it. I want to process it. We need to go through this long and this prolonged dance of healing that has to take place. And so I feel like we definitely need to talk about racism, how it still exists, the effects of past racism in this country. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it brings up hurtful feelings, and it's not the most fun conversation to have, but I think it's necessary if we're going to see the healing that biblically is an evidence of the gospel. So in Ephesians chapter 2, we see that racial reconciliation, and really just reconciliation in the body of Christ, that is one of the greatest outworkings of the gospel. And so we just have to talk about it to see that happen.
Yeah, and I think it would, like on your analogy there, if one spouse is unfaithful, that takes a long time to just get over and get through and heal from that one event. But if there's continual unfaithfulness, right? Like if there was unfaithfulness yesterday and the spouse brings it up, like you can't go back to, yeah, but the first initial one happened so long ago. So why are we even talking about that again? Like we have so many of these issues keep reoccurring and happening, and the issues are still there. So yeah, maybe it would be a different story if there wasn't continual racism that was happening and things that were tied back to the history of what it was. But it's very clear to me that I think there's definitely still things going on. One of the things that we talked about before is me as a Caucasian white person, I I definitely believe in white privilege because I think I've experienced it. And where that's coming from is a bit of my history. So I was born in Canada and I grew up in the United States. So I lived in Canada for like a year and a half as a baby, and then we moved to the Phoenix area. And I grew up in the Phoenix area. And so technically I was an immigrant. I had a green card. I was legal. So, but I was an immigrant. And like the worst that I got for being Canadian was like kids teasing me that I was a maple sucking puck slapper, the joke that the Simpsons had, you know, like I like maple syrup and as a Canadian, I like hockey. And so, but that was like the worst that I experienced as far as any kind of prejudice or anything like that for being Canadian.
Mhm.
And so I'm literally not American, and yet I'm treated just like I am one. I grew up, I didn't become an American for a long time because the only thing I couldn't do was vote. The only thing that I felt being a Canadian, being not an American, was I'm just not able to vote. And I was like, well, I'm not pressing. I don't have this real pressing need to go vote. So I'll just not pay the extra money to go get my citizenship, and I'll work my jobs and do this. And it's like, so then when I hear stories like you and just you have to be thinking about what you're wearing when you go work out and all that goes into that, it's very, very clear to me that I had privilege just being white that you didn't have, even though I wasn't even a citizen. The other thing that it did being Canadian is that I always felt a little bit more like an outsider who was given insider access. So I knew I was right. I knew I was on the outside. I knew I was Canadian. I knew I was an American, and so yet it didn't pay attention. People wouldn't treat me like that. They would treat me as if I was an American and as if I deserved everything else that everybody else got. And so as I look at what I received and what privileges that were there for me, it was really apparent that just because I was white, I got a pass, whereas other minorities don't have that. And so that was one of the things that we had talked about before is it's definitely there. There's definitely white privilege that's there. And there's definitely racism that's happening.
Yeah, and I think with white privilege, I think what sometimes when I talk to white people about white privilege, I think the hard part for them to understand is that they oftentimes will hear it as, well, no, I worked hard for what I had.
Mm-hmm.
That may be true, but what is also kind of lurking in the fiber of our society is that there are more obstacles in the way of the African American achieving what they desire to achieve versus the white person who's dealing with the same background, same opportunity, same educational level. The road to quote unquote success is just going to have many more obstacles in it for the African American than the white. And it's not to say that people didn't work hard for what they have gotten or what they've obtained. It's just the reality that we're living in a society that was made by white people. The rules were made by white people for white people, and everyone else, whether you're an immigrant, a non-white immigrant, or you're someone who is an American born here that's a minority, that you're having to conform to a culture in a society, a dominant culture, in ways that are not always very easy to do. And so people who are already a part of the dominant culture, you just have to be yourself, and the rules are for you. The game is for you, and you have to conform and try to learn and figure it out. And so it's definitely, there. I don't have that kind of privilege, but I do see it at play. And
yeah, like why would I not have those hurdles there, right? Like, why wouldn't I have those hurdles growing up? In fact, my grandfather on my mother's side, he fought on the German side in World War II. He was very he was, I think, 15 or 16 towards the end of the war, and they just conscripted him. He wasn't a Nazi, but he fought on the German side. So, like, that's in my background, and I don't have any hurdles that come up, even with us being America's enemies in World War II. Like, that's in my blood, and yet I don't have those hurdles. So there's definitely something that's there, that's operating, that's keeping that stays sustained in our society, that is a problem that minorities, African Americans especially, have to deal with, that white people don't. And so yeah, and like you said, it doesn't mean that everything comes easy. It just means that there aren't those extra negative hurdles and obstacles that are there for white folks. So I'm right there with you, and I think that's accurate.
Yeah, and so I know you're a person who, one, understands and has seen, experienced white privilege, but you're also someone who recognizes that systemic racism still exists. Can you say more about that, about systemic racism?
Yeah, I'm no expert, and I haven't done enough looking on this to say definitively and all of that. But when I hear the conversations that I have with you, I look at Black Lives Matter movement and the police brutality issues, and that there's just so many cases. Like, there's so many cases that just keep coming up, keep coming up, keep coming up. This Ahmaud Arbery situation. I can't put myself in exactly what those guys were thinking, but everything in that video looks like they think that they're superior, and they have some reason to prevent somebody that's a threat. And at the most in that situation, man, like, what do they got them on? Like, trespassing in a constructed house? Is that the most that they got them on? So there's issues there. There's so many issues I've heard about the way the housing markets operated, and loans that were given out, and ways that was systemically limited and elevated the white community and kept minorities out of certain communities. There's so many different ways that is still happening. And then the profiling, and on and on and on it goes. I think I need to hear more from you about, I need to do learning is where I'm coming to you, Geronimo, here saying, teach me more about what it is and where these things are.
Sure.
And open my eyes to get the blinders off, because I don't naturally see it. I have to go looking to see it.
Yeah, certainly. And so one thing I know you've mentioned before, as we kind of talk about systemic racism a little bit, is that sometimes white people will kind of say that it's an individual problem. Like these two gentlemen that approached Ahmaud Arbery, they're racist. There's nothing else at play here. It's just two racist people, or potentially racist people, that did something that they probably had no constitutional right to do. Meaning, we have a right to due process, a right to, if we have committed a crime, let the legal system handle justice the way the legal system does. But we know that there are other things at play here other than just the racist behavior of some people. And so I was doing a little bit of research before this conversation in some of the systems that I have bumped up against myself, and just some of the disparities that come because of systems that we don't necessarily see or acknowledge. So here are a couple things. So for every $100 of wealth, that a white person makes in America, the average Black person makes $57 of wealth. And so there's a huge wealth disparity in this country. And so then when we look at the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, there are fewer than 5 African American CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And if we were just looking at the number of African Americans that there should be based on the amount of the population that we make up, there should be 60, and there's less than 5. And so there's a huge disparity in the people who make decisions in corporations, which has a trickle down effect. And it's not because of a lack of education, it's just a lack of opportunity that educated Black people experience. And so then when we look at education, African Americans with college degrees are 2 times more likely to be unemployed than white people with the same college degree. And so we would say, I remember you saying, it was so profound a few years ago, that white people will sometimes have this mindset: if Black people would just do what we tell them to do, if you just go to school, get your education, get a job, work hard, then you can live the American dream. White people have figured out the play, just run the play and you'll experience the same success. Which the only problem with that is there are so many obstacles in the way, both because of systemic racism and then even the trauma that Black people have gone through from years of oppression. And so even with education, even with high levels of education, Black people are still more likely to be unemployed than their white counterparts who have the same educational background. When it comes to resumes, if you have a resume with a white sounding name, you are 50% more likely to get a call back than a resume that has a quote unquote Black sounding name to it. So even with the same level of credentials, just your name, if you're African American, like mine, Jerron, that's not mistaken for a white name, I would probably not get called back at the same rate as someone named Sean or Nathan or something that is not obviously.
Cody. Yeah.
What's that?
I said Cody. Cody's a very white name.
Yes, yes, exactly. Then we look at lower levels of education. So Black children are more likely to get suspended for the same violations in school that a white child might commit. So same infraction, different levels of punishment. And then when that leads to the criminal justice systems, Black juveniles are more likely to be tried as an adult versus their white counterparts that commit the same crimes. And so we see this all throughout, like you said, throughout housing situations historically, with redlining and pushing African Americans towards city and dense population areas where the quality of life is just different, and you got factories in your neighborhood and asbestos, and you got all kinds of stuff, pollution in the air, where other people don't have those challenges, which leads to health issues and lack of access to health. So there's all kinds of, at every layer, there are just systems that are perpetuated, I believe, by the lack of awareness and silence. And it's my contention that the Church of Jesus Christ has an obligation, especially people with influence and power, which white men traditionally hold in this country, to be able to fight against, push against, which starts with awareness and then work towards something that's more pleasing to God.
Yeah, going off of what you were saying earlier, I think a lot of white people sometimes have this idea that we're all equal now and everything's fine. And so you just, like you were saying, run the playbook. Just keep your head low, stay out of trouble, go to college, and then everything's fine. And one, I think it misses the obstacles that you're talking about, the systems that are there, but it also misses the history, and that we never rectified that we started African Americans out at the bottom and we left them at the bottom. And just that alone by itself is going to set up disparity between different people. Like, so here's another personal example. My grandmother, I went to I was able to get out of undergrad with a scholarship, so I got through undergrad, and then I went to seminary, and I had to take out some student loans for seminary. And my wife and I we were hustling, we were working hard trying to get that done, and we are paying it off, paying it off, paying it off, and then but we were tired and we were worn out from that. And then my grandmother randomly gave us a good chunk of money to get rid of the last little bit of our loan, and it was a substantial amount of money.
Right.
And we could have worked that off. We could have worked hard and continued to do that, but we got that gift, and that was a gift that we had. Well, that's coming from my grandmother, who her and my grandfather made that money a long time ago. And there's generational wealth that white people have that African Americans didn't. So the African Americans that were in my grandparents' age range, they didn't have that access. And so you can't ignore that, because it has direct effects today. And then on top of that, it's not just that we had a difference in how the wealth level of African Americans and whites. It's that whites back in the day did some amazingly awful things, like the redlining you were talking about. I saw this one thing about why are the poor places in a lot of neighborhoods or in a lot of cities, I think it's on the east side. Why is it on the east side? Well, because most of these cities, the wind blows from the west towards the east. And so back when the factories were spewing out pollution and smoke, they would put the African American community, I can't remember, I think it was east, but they would put it in the east of the town, because that's where all the smoke would come from the factories. And so they literally put people in the worst part. They put black folks in the worst part of the town. And so that has effects generations later. And to ignore that is ignorant at best, and nefarious at worst. It's not true that it has no effect now. That's not accurate. It has effects today. And we have to be talking about that. We have to acknowledge that, because it's true.
Absolutely. And so I know before as we were talking about what we were going to talk about, you had asked me to talk about how, with all this going on, how I'm feeling about.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that, right? So you had that post, and you were talking about hey, I gotta be aware of what I'm doing when I'm going out to work out, and you got that. There's that feeling. You can put your feeling. What are you feeling on Facebook? And you put, I'm feeling annoyed.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was very intriguing, that with another one of these situations that would justifiably, make you feel enraged, infuriated, angry, you're at that stage where you're feeling annoyed. And so I wanted to ask you, how are you feeling? Where's that coming from? And how are you doing with that?
That's a good question. And again, I don't want to speak for the Black community. I'll just speak for myself. I would say that I think I'm past anger most times. I think I'm past sadness a lot, because it's so emotionally exhausting. I remember when the Trayvon Martin situation happened, I was furious about it, very emotionally invested in the situation. And I remember I was telling my father-in-law, he was in town, I think the day the verdict was supposed to come out, and I was just certain that there was going to be something. And we watched the verdict, and I was horrified, and I was just profoundly sad, angry. And this was one of the first time that I was in my life, I can honestly say, I was like, man, I just want Jesus to come back. I'm ready for Jesus to come back right now. I'm done. I'm done with life on this earth. Jesus, come on, I'm ready. And so I think from there, it's been just exhausting emotionally, to deal with some of the reality. So when things like this go on, it just reminds me of the accommodations that I typically make in life to try to put white people at ease. And sometimes I'm more up to it than I am at other times. And so even with just working out, I made that Facebook post, just thinking through some of the accommodations that I make. And it's just, I'm so used to making them, it doesn't enrage me until I actually think about, why am I doing all this? But that's just working out. There are, countless other accommodations that I believe Black people make on a regular basis, that when these things happen, we're reminded of that, and it doesn't feel good. And then it's probably emotionally exhausting, where anger is exhausting, sadness is exhausting. I was just annoyed that this is still a reality that unfortunately I live with. Now here's another part of this, Nigel. So with African Americans, when something like this happens, where there's no arrest, there's unrest because there was no arrest. But we can't let our guard down, because there still has to be trial, and so we're still on edge, because even though there's an arrest that's been made, now we're saying, well, is justice going to be done? And so then there's another wave of emotion that'll come when trial comes, and then will there be will there be a fair trial? Will there be justice? Whatever that looks like in that situation. I think there was a shooting in Dallas where Botham Jean was shot by a police officer. He was sitting in his apartment. She had come into the wrong place, and I don't remember if she was arrested right away, but I think Black people are just tired that it takes protests and it takes all of this just for.
What is that about? What is that about? Why did that take so long?
Yes.
It's what's the other situation? I was just looking it up. The girl that in Louisville, I forget her name, but they were looking for some other guy, and they came into the apartment, and her boyfriend, there was a shooting engagement between her and him and the police officers, and she was shot 8 times. The guy they were looking for was on another part of town. He was already in custody. Wow. And it's like there are too many of these to keep track of at this point, to stay on top of. There's so many of these situations where I bet that's got to be exhausting. Like I can imagine you can't take the same level of stimulus for that long. Right. Here's an analogy I use for that. So I went to Germany once, and there's the castle, I'm going to butcher the name, Neuschwanstein, I think is what it's called, but it's what they designed the Cinderella castle after. It's gorgeous. Like it's near Munich, and the King of Bavaria in the 1800s, like bankrupt the country building this thing. It's just a wonder. It's gorgeous. It's amazing. And so I went to go see it, and we were there with the tour guide, and all of us tourists are looking at this place like, man, this is amazing. It's awesome. It's in the Alps, and there's this lake that it's overlooking. It's crazy. Mm-hmm. So I asked the tour guide, how long did it take you to get used to this castle? Was it like 6 months until it wore off? Like the shine wore off on how amazing this is? He's like, no, it was about 6 weeks. Mm. And, millions of people go see this castle every year, and it took them 6 weeks to just shut down because you have the same stimuli over and over and over again. That's right. You naturally react down to it. So I can imagine you just being in the annoyance stage, and in the, I would guess, numb. Would you say you're numb to it?
At times, yes.
Yeah.
At times, yes. And that's the scary part, because I don't want to ever become so numb that I stop working towards progress and just accepting, this is just what it is, and just moving forward, trying to make the best of a bad situation, instead of saying, hey, we got to work hard so that my children don't experience what I experienced, as my parents' generation worked hard so that I wouldn't experience the depth of experience that they had, and on and on and on down the line. But there's also another feeling that I want to express that I think is really important, and that is when all of this came out, and specifically when I put this post out, I was shocked at the response that I was getting, not only online, but even by phone, from other white pastors in my circle. 4 or 5 years ago, I would not have gotten that kind of response. I believe what I would have gotten more of from my white pastor friends was, hey, we're just going to be kind of silent on it. We're going to wait for the facts to come out. We're going to see, what the criminal justice system has to say, and that's it. But I do believe that much progress has been made over the last few years as it pertains to white pastors in particular understanding that there is systemic racism that still exists in this country, and how Black people need white pastors to empathize with us. We need white people, white pastors in particular, to use their influence, their pulpit, their voice, and to express, hey, we don't know all the facts of the case, but what we do know for sure is there is a large, as you said earlier, Nigel, there's a large section of the body of Christ that is hurting. And facts or no facts, we want to empathize and mourn with those who mourn, as we're told in the book of Romans. We want to put our arm around people and say, hey, we're here with you. We're gonna cry with you. We're gonna empathize with you. We're going to share your outrage. At times, we're going to share your sadness because people are hurting, and we want to be there for you. I got multiple phone calls from pastors just calling to say, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing with all this? What's going on in your head? How can I help? How can we pray? And just grieving with me. And to me, that goes a long way, and it's a lot different than it was 4 years ago. And so I even applaud you for being willing to come on and just share some of your experiences, and even acknowledging some stuff and your concern for the Black community that we don't always see on a regular basis. So I'm grateful for that progress, and just want to thank you for coming on.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think it's helpful for you guys to hear that I don't think I'm an anomaly. I don't think I'm a unicorn in the white community. Especially in kind of our age range, I sense a real strong movement of especially white pastors and just white people that are my age that are really waking up to the reality of the situation. I think we had closed our eyes and assumed it was okay, and over the last 5 or so years, I think we've really woken up, and there's a lot of people that feel the way I feel and care the way, that I'm trying to express that we care. I think you probably won't see it or hear a lot of it because I think a lot of us, and especially me, specifically me, I don't know what to do about it. I don't know how to fix the situation. Like I hear the use your platform for it, and I'm like, I don't know how to even go about doing that. I don't know where exactly the issues are. I don't know where the problems are exactly. So I think there's a lot of people in my shoes, in my situation, that would love to help. They want to help, and they just don't know how. And so on one hand, that's discouraging because we'd love to help, and you would love us to help. But on the other hand, I want you guys to be encouraged that you may not be seeing it, but the tide is turning. I feel like it's turning with white people. It can still go haywire in a number of different ways, but by and large, I think a lot of people are becoming aware. They're listening, they're hearing, they care about it. And yeah, one of the things I wanted to express is just go back to the idea that I think sometimes there's a gaslighting that's happening to the African American community that says, hey, you guys are just, you're reading into this and there's not really something there. And I want to say, as an outsider, like, you're not crazy. You're not misreading things. You're not seeing things that aren't there. I really think there is a system that's there, and it's a problem. We got to fix it. And so hopefully that's I hope that's encouraging to you guys. That's my prayer, is that it's encouraging for you guys to hear that we're quiet, not because we don't care, but because we don't know where to go. And so if you guys come up with ways that we can help out with that. Yeah, do you have any ideas off the top of your head?
Well, I was going to say, Nigel, that should probably be another session. When we talk about, what can the average person do? And there's some, I know some people that have some good ideas, and we may bring some other people on the chat and dialogue about what we do today. And I know when things like the Ahmaud situation happen, everybody is, there's heightened emotion, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done between now and the next incident, so that progress is made, that we see progress like we've seen, at least I have personally seen over the last couple of years. So I do think that is worthy of another session to talk about what we do.
Absolutely.
Nigel, can you pray with us or pray for us? Do you have any thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, we love you. We love you guys. The Lord loves you as well. I'm preaching through, final thought. I'm preaching through Matthew, and we're in chapter 10 right now. And so he's sending out the disciples, and he's saying, I'm going to send you out like sheep amongst wolves. And you're going to be scourged. You're going to be persecuted. If they called the head of the household Beelzebul, like, how are they going to mistreat the members of the household? And so persecution comes, it happens. But where he ends with that, where Jesus tells his people to go, is don't fear those that can just kill the body. Fear the one that can destroy both body and soul in hell. But he ends with God, he knows the number of hairs on our head. And it's this expression that the Father cares so deeply for his kids. And so above and beyond me seeing you guys and caring about you guys, I want you also to hear that the Lord sees and knows. And one of the things he talks about is that all things will be revealed, and all things that are hidden will be brought to light. And all the things that I don't see from where I sit and where you don't see from where you sit, the Lord will make all of those things clear. He will reveal those things. When the time comes, justice will be served. And he sees, and he sees what you're going through now. And he doesn't just send you out into trouble for no reason. He has a purpose that is glorious and has your glory in it as well. And so just want to close with that idea. And so, if you're good, I'll pray and we'll close this out.
That'd be awesome. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Heavenly Father, I lift up to you Jerron. I lift up to you his church and his people, Lord. I pray, God, that you would bring so much comfort and peace to them during this season and during this incident and all the incidents that will come up in the future, Lord. I pray, God, that you would heal them. I pray, Lord, that you would give them sight beyond this earth, beyond what is going on, to see your care and your concern for them and your love for them, Lord. I pray, God, that you would mobilize myself and other people like me so that we can fight against this wicked evil. I pray, Lord, that you would allow us to find those avenues, allow us to partner well with each other, Lord. And God, I pray that you would bring your justice. We look forward to your return, Lord. And in the meantime, God, strengthen them, encourage them, build them up, and give them the hope of the gospel, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thanks, Nigel. And
hey, my pleasure, man. My pleasure.
Looking forward to the next time.
We're praying for you, Shine Bible. See you later.